Hello and welcome to the CX Files for September 26th, 2024. My name is Mark Hillary and I'm in Sao Paulo, Brazil.
And I'm Peter Ryan in Montreal. Mark, great to catch up with you. And we've got a very exciting interview on the CX Files this week.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I know that it's somebody that we both know and you've just
Yeah,
been talking to. So why don't you give us the lowdown on the subject this week?
you bet. So I was able to catch up with Graham Brown, who is the SVP for Growth and Transformation in EMEA with Alorica. Now, Graham and I go way back. He's actually not just a friend, but he's also a former coworker. We were together at a BPO for a while. And Graham has actually emerged, I'd say, as one of the foremost thought leaders when it comes to the whole concept of AI-driven simultaneous voice translation, which is actually becoming a thing now in our sector. It's got a huge amount of implication for not just the way contact center work is being done using the voice channel, but also implications on what's become an established business model from the perspective of the multilingual hub. So Graham and I talked a little bit about conceptually where these technologies and solutions are at currently, what the implications will be for multilingual hub as a concept going forward. We also talked a little bit about what the enterprise buyer should be thinking about as they look to try and engage a provider of these types of solutions and applications. So it was a well-rounded, very dynamic discussion, as it always is with Graham, and one that I think everyone's going to enjoy this week.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I met Graham a couple of months ago when I was over in the UK, and we had a great breakfast and conversation in Windsor, so in the shadow of the King's Castle there, and it was very good talking to him, and he told me a lot about this simultaneous translation. Which I think it's really fascinating because I think that we've been looking at how AI is changing the customer experience from the perspective of chatbots getting better or greater efficiency inside the contact center. And those have been the two main discussions. But I think here what you're seeing is an actual business solution that's really being dramatically improved. And it's creating so many opportunities for like e-commerce companies that want to break into a
Mhm.
new market. They can very quickly ramp up and offer service in additional languages, and also for where you've got very niche languages as well, where it's very hard to staff for a language where you're only getting a few calls a week. So there's some real business solutions here.
There are some real business solutions, and equally speaking, the extent to which I think that we're seeing this concept as a business model taking off is really quite something. There's all sorts of different verticals where it's becoming more popular. It helps address elements such as seasonality, which we know is massive in terms of retail, e-commerce, travel, and tourism. And I think what it comes down to as well, Mark, is that this whole idea about niche language delivery, which has been a challenge in the CX space for so long. It's not as simple as going and recruiting a dozen Finnish speakers or maybe two dozen Danish speakers, just to pick on a couple of countries here within the scope of a multilingual hub. We know how expensive it is to do it onshore. And while there are cases to be made for virtualizing smaller numbers of niche language speakers, we also know that from a compliance standpoint, that just might not necessarily fit the bill. So, Graham has been able to provide a lot of insight in terms of where these solutions are at now, but more importantly, where they're going and what the enterprise community, what the buyers of these solutions should be thinking about as they look to engage.
Okay, why don't we go straight to this interview with Graham Brown?
And the CX Files is pleased to welcome a longtime friend of the show. We've got Graham Brown, who is the SVP for Growth and Transformation in EMEA for Alorica. Graham, it's great to have you join us from your home office in the United Kingdom today.
It's lovely to be invited. Thank you, Peter.
And I hope that the weather where you are is beautiful and as stunning as we're facing here in Montreal, where it's going up to a balmy 36 degrees here towards the end of September.
Look, I live in the UK, Peter. It's generally grey and wet. There is a little bit of sunshine outside my window, though. You'll be pleased to hear.
Well, glass half full. That's why I enjoy you, Graham. And
Absolutely,
for
absolutely.
for for the purposes of our listeners, not only is Graham a longtime pal, but we are former co-workers. We from a previous life, a previous iteration in the BPO space. And one of the reasons I've always enjoyed working with you, Graham, is because you've never hesitated to challenge norms. You've never hesitated to call things out from a different perspective, a different angle. And I'm really pumped about the discussion we're going to have today because it's a topic that I know is one that you're really passionate about, and that is the extent to which AI can be applied to do simultaneous voice translation, which I think effectively is a real game changer. And for full disclosure, Alorica has done a lot of work on this. Alorica, I'd say, is probably very much at the forefront of these solutions and this technology. But Graham, as a starting point, as a starter for 10, as you folks of a certain generation in the UK would say, I would just throw out there that the use of AI-driven translation solutions and customer experience has been around for some time, but it's generally been more on the non-voice side. Voice-based applications are really, I would say, relatively new. So from a practical sense, from the standpoint of being able to apply these solutions in 2024, as we're moving into the last quarter, how how practical are these solutions in reality? How do you see these solutions in terms of how they can be enacted from a customer speaking to an agent perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think first and foremost, I think they're very practical right now. I think they're capable of doing a lot of what we've relied upon linguists to do for the last 20 plus years. You said yourself around, translation capabilities existed in many forms, probably for the last 10, 15 years. And I've got experiences in past lives where we've tried to utilize some of those tools. And I think in a non-live environment, you can get away with it because the translations have not always been perfect. The experience perhaps has not been as good as you would have wanted it to be, but because it was, digital interactions, you had the chance to either refine, review, or get a little bit of goodwill from the customer. But as we look at how those technologies, those capabilities have advanced over the last few years, I would say that they are now commonplace, and there's a number of organizations out there that utilize them. There's a number of providers that have invested quite heavily in them. So from a non-voice perspective, we've been there, and we've been there for a good few years. The voice perspective is different, though. It's live. You and I are speaking. You need to have comprehension, and I think one of the challenges was the quality of the translation wasn't as good as it should be, and the timeliness of that translation wasn't as good as it should be. So, we talk about latency in this environment quite a lot, and you don't want significant pregnant pauses as you're trying to have a conversation with a customer, especially when you think about a lot of voice traffic today is more of the emotive, maybe the high value or perhaps more complex type conversations. So, I think that's why it's taken a time for it to come through. But if I look over the last 12 months, that voice translation has become somewhat more commonplace. I still think, Alorica, and I would say this, I work for Alorica, is at the forefront of the developments in this technology. But we're seeing it in the consumer space. So Samsung, a number of months ago, when they launched their latest range of smartphones, was talking about live translate. Potentially a little bit gimmicky. It gave the users of their handsets the ability to communicate with people who spoke a different language, I think, and it covered 12 languages. Okay, but as soon as that technology bleeds into the consumer space, expectations of consumers then start to raise, and they expect that this technology will become more prevalent, more applicable within the business environment, which is what we're seeing today.
I think that you raise a really interesting point. Once something becomes pervasive within the consumer space, there's going to be an expectation that pretty well every enterprise a consumer is going to interact with is going to deploy this type of technology. And I had my first real interaction with this last year. About this time, I was in Japan, and To be fair, I think people in Japan speak much better English than people on our side of the pond do Japanese. But you do run into from time to time instances where there's going to be a bit of a voice disconnect. And a gentleman in a bar that I was in who was working behind the bar pulled out a tool that he could speak into, and then it would repeat it out in English. He would speak in Japanese, it would repeat it in English. I would answer him in English, and it would repeat it in Japanese to him. So we were able to communicate that way. And it was relatively seamless. So from the standpoint of where we are today in the contact center realm, Graham, from the standpoint of where you're coming from, why should an enterprise CX leader be considering this type of technology? What should be top of mind for them as they look to try and decide if this technology is going to be a good fit for their organization and if it's something that they want to take on?
Yeah, a brilliant, brilliant question. And there's a number of ways to answer that, Peter. So you're going to have to bear with me here as I go through a few different kind of user cases and reasons why that there's value here. I think first and foremost, when we think about global support, multilingual support, it has been heavily reliant upon linguists. And you've seen an explosion of multilingual hubs dotted around the world today, whether that's in Spain, in Portugal, in Greece, go into Central and Eastern Europe, as you go into Africa and Middle East. So you're starting to see these hubs come up. Now, they're reliant upon linguists in two ways. One is around those people that speak multiple languages, okay? Or it's about relocating people from the domestic market into the market where the hub is established in order to offer those language skills. It's all reliant upon people. And people are unfortunately problematic. You and I are probably both problematic in our own small ways, so whether that's around, the availability, whether that's around the cost effectiveness, whether that's around the fact that we can't guarantee loyalty or tenure of these individuals as we invest in bringing them into the market. So, that does create a challenge, and cost is a big one. If I think about certain markets, there's a number of options. So you take English as a language, brilliant. If I want to deliver low cost but high quality English support, I can go to multiple markets, whether that is Egypt, South Africa. I can go into Central Europe, I can go to the Philippines, I can go to India. There's many different options available for us. Okay, same true maybe for the French market, for the Spanish market, France, North Africa, Spain. You can start to go into LATAM. So there are options there. But then you think about other markets, other languages, the Nordics, the Benelux region, the Dash region. Those languages are very, very difficult to source. And within the domestic markets, working within a contact center environment is probably not a very attractive option. So you end up paying a significantly higher rate to attract talent in. And so the economics don't work. So I think there is a play here that says, from a cost perspective, this technology will help to unlock some significant efficiencies. But it's more than just that. I think, when we look at the operational delivery, and I've worked in a kind of global roles and in multilingual environments for the last couple of decades. And it is by nature inefficient because you need to bring people in to support a particular language queue. Now, that's great when you've got volume, but where you've got potentially small volumes, it can create a very unproductive environment. But you still need those individuals there because you're not able to accurately predict when that volume is going to come in and how many people you're going to need at what point of the day. So with this language technology, you can solve for language holistically rather than in silos. So rather than needing 200 people across 10 languages, you might be able to support your business with 150 and still cover those languages. That's a significant benefit. And then you've got to think about the experience that you give the consumer as well. Why should somebody who lives in a different market get a worse experience because they're in a market that has smaller volume or a more unique language set? That isn't fair. And actually, we should be trying to provide consistent experiences for brands across the globe. So there's a number of options there that I think, make this a really attractive proposition. But it's not about ripping out and replacing your multilingual talent. It's about augmenting what you've got. So there might be certain scenarios where it makes sense to use this technology and others where it doesn't. Could be for certain languages, could be for certain times of the year when you experience peaks. It could be for, unexpected situations that have created demands that you're not able to solve for using language skill. There's a whole host of ways in which this technology is applicable. There's a whole host of benefits that sit behind it. And for me, as you said, I'm really passionate about this stuff. It works, it's scalable, it's ready. The experience it gives consumers is fantastic. And, I think this in probably 2 to 3 years will be commonplace, not a alternate to delivering multilingual support using linguists.
So you actually read my mind there, because I'm very interested in the impact that this is going to have on the multilingual hub business model, which we've become very used to over the course of the past decade and a half. You think about destinations like Barcelona, like Lisbon, Athens, Cairo. These have all predicated themselves on the capacity to find people from different language groups, linguists with different skills, bring them into a center, and to be able to deliver in one concurrent location. I can recall when I moved to Dublin back in 2000, that's exactly the model that was being used in Ireland at the time. Now, we all know the pressures that multilingual hubs have in terms of not being able to consistently source, as you say, certain niche languages, having to bring people in, fly them in, spend the money on plane fare, setting them up in accommodation for a temporary period of time, only probably to have them leave in 2 to 3 months after they've exhausted themselves in terms of having fun in some of these fun and funky destinations. My question to you then, Graham, would be, what do you see, given the state of play with this technology and how rapidly it's evolving, what's going to be the future of the multilingual hub? Where does that sit as a business model moving into 2025 and beyond?
Yeah, fantastic question. And I'll just consult my crystal ball for you, Peter. But I think, the multilingual hub model has been hugely successful, but there are constraints, as we've spoken about already. Do I think this technology will totally replace all of the investments that organizations have made in those multilingual hubs? No, probably not. But the reliance upon them, I think, will be dramatically reduced. And, that means that the linguists are going to be used as a fallback position for certain journeys that consumers go on. But the technology itself, could this replace multilingual support across it? Absolutely, it could. What does that mean then for the centres themselves and the employees that are delivering this work? It's very difficult to say. We pivot, we evolve. Survival of the fittest, Darwinism. But if I think about the model that we've got today as we deploy this technology across our existing client base, we're looking at some of the, let's say, more cost advantageous locations where we know that we can provide scale in a single language or a small group of languages, and using that as a base to build out consistent understanding, consistent talent, consistent experience, and deploying the technology on top of it. Because that's where you'll get the biggest benefit for deploying this technology. But, it doesn't need to be constrained in that way. The way in which we've configured Revolt, real-time voice language translation, is around the fact that anybody speaking any language can communicate to anybody else in any other language. So the easiest way for me to think about it, because I'm British, I speak English, is we will go to markets such as Egypt, South Africa, Philippines, and use the English language talent in that market and augment it with Revolt to provide multilingual support. But if organizations have already invested in centers, whether they're domestic, whether they're hub and spoke, whether they are, global support centers, this technology could be deployed in those environments, utilizing a whole host of different languages. You could have, German speaking to Spanish, speaking to Japanese, speaking to Korean, speaking to Russian, if that's what you wanted to do. The connotations, if you like, of how you use this technology are limitless.
So, Graham, I'm going to put myself in the shoes of an enterprise CX leader who's very interested in taking on this technology. I've been sold on it. I see the value of it. Now the big question is, and I think that this is a very important element that a lot of people forget, is being able to source the right provider of the technology, being able to source the right partner. Given the fact that we're talking about a technology stack that is really evolving very rapidly, and there's a lot of dynamism around it, what should I, as that CX procurement leader, be thinking about as I source a partner? What are some of the key facets I should be looking for?
So I'm going to flip that question slightly and make it more about me, or make it more about Alorica, in terms of the way in which we're solving for this and why we think we're a credible partner. And I think some of those lessons will answer into the question that you've asked there. So, for us, especially within the EMEA region, we're only in a small number of strategic locations. We can deploy technology at pace because we are not cannibalizing anything that we do. Okay, but Alorica is not a technology organization. It's a technology-led organization. Okay, and we combine the technology with the people to deliver the outcomes. And where I think that's equally beneficial is because we actually want to own the end-to-end. What I found, and I'm sure what a number of your listeners will have found as well, when you work with technology partners, they provide brilliant solutions that solve for a particular group of interactions. But where the technology fails, I say fails, doesn't work, doesn't deliver the desired outcome, they don't care about that. What they care about is they've been able to contain 70% of the contact, 80% of the contact. But, there's still 20, 30% that falls out that requires additional support. And that is all part of the experience that brands give to their customers. We consider that in everything we do. So as we build out these solutions, we don't just think about how the technology works. We also think about where the technology isn't going to work and how we continue to support that customer and make it seamless for them as they need to pivot into a live agent environment. So I think, for me, that's how we've differentiated. And I think that is really, really important. I think what you've also got to look at, as whenever you evaluate the technology, is around how secure it is, how scalable it is, how much investment the organization is going to continue to make with the technology as well. Because, we've seen that the rate of change over the last 24 months has been incredible. If I went back 2 years ago, I would never imagine I'd be talking about this with you today. And in another 2 years, we are going to be talking about something completely different. If I look at what's happening with conversational AI and thinking about where that can take us, there's a whole different conversation to be had then, which is actually, why do you even need to, augment the people with the technology? Can the technology not do it all for you? And, we may find ourselves in that situation in 24 months.
Well, Graham, it's been fantastic to have you on the CX Files. Thanks for providing some insight into, I think, a topic that's being discussed quite frequently within our space. There are a lot of, I would say, competing perceptions out there, and being able to provide a little bit of real world pragmatism towards how these solutions can operate within the scope of voice delivery is very much appreciated. So great to have you on, and look forward to your next appearance on the CX Files.
And thank you once again for the invite, Peter. I've really enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening to the CX Files podcast. We really appreciate your feedback and suggestions. You can reach myself, Mark Hillary, or Peter Ryan via LinkedIn. Please also leave a rating or review on your favourite podcast provider, as that helps more people to find us. As always, we'd like to thank Chris Haig at Traction Media for the CX Files graphics. See you next week.